Anyway, this is the Saturn Junkyard YouTube channel. I am a virtuous schlub, and welcome to the party, pal. Die Hard had killer robots in it, right? Yeah, I thought so. I love that movie. Today we're going to dive right into some brawling action with a grudge match between two of Sega's most prolific beat-em-up classics. And of course I'm talking about...
Aw yeah, beat-em-up classics. It must be Golden Axe versus Streets of Rage. Right?
Oh, right. Shit. Yeah, I kind of forgot about those. No, instead today we're going to be talking about Sega's other 3D brawlers, Die Hard Arcade and Dynamite Cop. These were released as part of the same series called Dynamite Deca #1 and Dynamite Deca 2 in Japan. And they originally came out for the arcades and were later ported to Sega consoles, including the Saturn for Die Hard Arcade and Dreamcast for the second game, Dynamite Cop. You may also have noticed that I have the North American version of Die Hard Arcade, while I got the Japanese version of Dynamite Deca, which is Dynamite Cop out west. And the reason for that is, I don't know, who gives a shit?
Grudge match! Die Hard Arcade versus Dynamite Cop!
The premise of both of these games is rather straightforward. In the North American and European versions of Die Hard Arcade, you are John McClane, or at least a vaguely rough polygonal representation of him. And your job is to fight through an office building full of terrorists who are attempting to break into a vault and steal shit. The game basically mirrors the events of the original Die Hard film pretty much exactly. Remember when John McClane fought off those killer robots? Or what about when he took on those sumo wrestlers? And how about when the president's daughter was there for some reason and he had to save her? Yep, all of those classic moments from the film are wonderfully preserved in this game. It's pretty much a scene-for-scene depiction. While the main protagonist, John McClane, at least kinda, sorta, maybe looks like Bruce Willis, the main villain, Hans Gruber, looks almost identical to Alan Rickman. Okay, so he isn't Hans Gruber at all. Instead, this is a dude named Wolf Hongo, which is unfortunate. Alright, so there's no Alan Rickman, but does the game at least have Carl Winslow?
Not even.
Ah, damn it.
We have to get her out as soon as possible.
Then there's the sequel, Dynamite Cop, which ditches the Die Hard film license and replaces Bruce Willis with 3 special agents, Bruno, Gene, and Eddie. They are sent to infiltrate a cruise ship full of terrorist pirates, and the president's daughter is trapped there yet again for some reason. I don't know how on earth this keeps happening. Anyway, there's still no Hans Gruber in this sequel, and Wolf Hongo again returns as the main villain. But this time he's been upgraded into a buff, one-eyed cyborg. So yeah, they're really stepping up the stakes there.
First category, beat 'em uptitude.
Both of these games are brawlers, and they don't mess around with that formula. Die Hard Arcade instills the player with the ability to throw a flurry of punches, kicks, and throws as you bust up some of the most colorfully dressed terrorists you can imagine. Meanwhile, you get to pick up and use a huge variety of random weapons recklessly dropped throughout the building. Okay. In addition to all of that hardware, you're mostly going to let your fists do the talking, but you'll often have a handgun sidearm that you can use, at least until your ammo runs out. Oddly, your bullets feel less powerful than punches, but they at least come in handy when helping to keep your distance and get in some cheap shots on some of the enemies sometimes. But for the most part, throwing kick and punch combos will be far more
efficient.
Then Dynamite Cop picks up right where Die Hard Arcade left off. The game takes advantage of the advanced Dreamcast hardware, giving the player a bit more flexibility in its gameplay, including the ability to maneuver and face enemies in more directions. Well, diagonally at least. This sounds like a minor thing, but it helps Dynamite Cop feel more fluid than Die Hard Arcade, which more rigidly forces you to face just left or right horizontally from your alignment along the 3D plane, and feels a little clunkier as a result. Dynamite Cop's controls also feel a little smoother and more responsive than Die Hard Arcade, making combos a bit easier to pull off. There are also a lot more weapons to pick up and take down baddies with, and they get pretty creative with that this time around.
Setting and stage designs.
The stage environments in these games are pretty well designed. In Die Hard Arcade, you're exploring the Nakatomi building, just looking for any brightly dressed terrorists to beat the living crap out of. The only problem is it all looks a little generic. Unlike the movie, there are no festive Christmas decorations to be found anywhere, and all of the rooms and hallways are fairly bland. On top of that, John McClane exhibits less efficient pathfinding than I would expect from someone who's the star of a straightforward beat-em-up game. You start out infiltrating the roof of the building via helicopter, then for some reason you make your way down all the way to the underground parking garage before heading back up to the lobby, back up to the roof, and then back down a few floors, and finally back up to the roof for the final showdown. That just seems exhausting. Meanwhile, Dynamite Cop significantly overhauls its setting over the first game. Rather than infiltrating a building full of terrorists, this time you infiltrate a cruise ship full of terrorists. Hey, I guess even they need a vacation. And these guys, well, they're living the life. They get to enjoy the full amenities of an all-inclusive cruise, including a shopping mall, a gym, a dance club, and even an entire pirate island, which I'm guessing is probably cursed. There's more variety here, and what's especially cool about Dynamite Cop is depending on the scenario you choose at the outset, the whole progression of the game changes in subtle and major ways. Throughout each voyage, you'll tread through some of the same locations, but they'll often be altered in some surprising ways. For example, in one playthrough, they'll be serving sushi in the dining room, and you'll end up fighting a Japanese chef, whereas other scenarios will be Chinese or French themed instead. The endgame will also vary a bit depending on which option you choose. This variation helps make Dynamite Cop worth replaying multiple times just to see all of the neat locales and set pieces it has to offer.
Beaster egg! Best game within a game!
A rather nifty inclusion in both games is that they each contain an obscure Sega arcade title as a playable minigame. In Die Hard Arcade, that title is Deep Scan, which was a 1979 arcade game where you control a battleship, and you need to move back and forth along the water, dropping slow-moving bombs into the ocean in an attempt to blow up numerous enemy submarines below you. This requires a good amount of strategy, as you have to plan and time your bombs well ahead of exactly when and where the enemy subs will be in position to get hit by them. Meanwhile, things are complicated by the finite number of bombs that you can drop at once, and the enemy subs also fire up towards you, so you'll need to be careful where you tread as you're moving around. I found Deep Scan to be very addicting, and I especially appreciate how the time you put into it ties directly into the main game, where you can accumulate additional credits to get you through Die Hard Arcade's main campaign by continuing to play and rack up points in Deep Scan. Dynamite Cop also contains a vintage Sega arcade title in the way of 1980s Tranquilizer Gun, which I actually hadn't heard of before I played Dynamite Cop. In this game, you play as a safari hunter who roams through the jungle shooting a variety of animals, including lions, snakes, and elephants, with the goal of pumping enough tranq darts into them until they get knocked out so you can drag them back to your truck, where you bank the points earned from their capture. It's a fairly fun game, but it's not quite as enjoyable or addicting as Deep Scan. Okay, well let's get back to the brawlers at hand.
Best wardrobe.
While Die Hard Arcade's bad guys sport some uber-trendy terror wear, Dynamite Cop steps up its fashion game by going full pirate chic, which is totally in this year. Their outfits are bold, bright, and scream, "We're here to pillage and plunder the runway."
Best wardrobe. Malfunctions.
In both titles, your player character sheds their clothes after taking damage throughout the game. Again, this aspect is extremely faithful to the movie. Just watch out for those glass shards on the floor everywhere when you inevitably lose your shoes.
Most reckless storage of extremely hazardous materials.
As one of Dynamite Cop's more perplexing aspects, your pirate terrorists' adversaries routinely leave highly explosive and flammable items just lying around in extremely irresponsible locations. They keep missile launchers in the boiler room, bazookas on the deck, and even normal everyday appliances like refrigerators and rice cookers become combustible weapons of destruction.
Most incompetent childcare.
So in Die Hard Arcade, the president's daughter somehow gets kidnapped and trapped in the building with the terrorists. But in Dynamite Cop, she gets trapped yet again on their cruise liner. Usually she's hiding in a desk or a suitcase or somewhere to help up her rate of survival, I guess. But how does she even find herself in that position to begin with, let alone twice? Is no one actually looking after her? I mean, where's Secret Service in all of this? Did they just cut the budget and they're seriously understaffed or something? Or does the president have like 50 other children and it's like, well, can't keep track of them all? Or perhaps they're just too busy presidenting to care? Whatever Mr. or Madam President's situation is in these games, they may be a good president, but they are a terrible parent.
Most irresponsible art collecting.
Another cool thing about Dynamite Cop is it has dozens, if not hundreds, of unlockable concept art pieces you can find throughout the game. If you have a VMU inserted into your controller, it will beep as you walk over certain spots, and there you will be able to pick up a new piece of art to add to your collection. I guess by digging them out of the floor? This makes me a little concerned that these terrorist pirates are not properly caring for the art collection they've amassed, presumably through theft. For all we know, some of these pieces could have some broader cultural or historical significance beyond the quick buck they'd stand to make by selling them off. It's a big cruise ship. Don't they have a dedicated art gallery that they could store all this stuff in? I should not be finding these pieces lying on the floor of a dance club or in the fish freezer. It's incredibly reckless. They may be pirates, but they could at least contribute this one small favor to society by taking better care of their art collection. Anyway, these pieces make for pretty cool collectibles for you, the player, to find, because not only do you get to unlock a bunch of neat concept drawings of all the characters, they also include some surprisingly amusing and insightful descriptions from the game's art designers. It's a really nice touch.
Most disgruntled firefighters. Deadliest baguettes. They must be day old.
Not even.
Lamest trash talk from a final boss.
Got here just in time. This whole building will explode in 5 minutes. But you won't live to see it anyway! So there you are. I've been expecting you. I have changed my body to destroy you.
Kinda weird.
Now, let's have some fun.
Best fistfights with a kraken. Overall winner.
So to sum this all up a bit, these are both fantastic games, and I couldn't recommend either of them enough. Both Die Hard Arcade and Dynamite Cop are just thoroughly enjoyable titles, and they fit right in with Sega's esteemed lineage of the beat-em-up genre. However, they are getting a little more expensive these days, especially Die Hard Arcade. That one's really inching up in price. So if you are interested in picking them up and you want to save a little money, I might recommend getting the Japanese versions, Dynamite Deca 1 and 2. But either way, you got to do it. I highly recommend picking them up. They're both fantastic games.
Both? Sounds like a cop-out. A Dynamite cop-out. So which is it, buddy?
Overall, I am a huge fan of both of these games. But if I had to pick a favorite, I think I would have to go with Dynamite Cop or Dynamite Deca 2. I mean, the gameplay just feels a little smoother and a little more polished. And I just like that it has more variation and the setting is a little more interesting. And its environments tend to have quite a bit more character. And there's just a little more to surprise you around each corner. And plus the weapon selection and other gameplay nuances, I just think are a little more refined. And it's also just zanier. It takes a lot more risks, whereas Die Hard Arcade still had that quirky element, but I feel like Dynamite Cop really just went all in on that tendency, and I like it all the more for it, because it really does make it quite a memorable beat 'em up. And even though it's a sequel to Die Hard Arcade, it ends up being an incredibly distinct experience in its own right. However, again, gotta recommend them both. At the end of the day, you really can't go wrong with either one if you're hankering for a good beat 'em up in the vein of like Streets of Rage or Final Fight or any of those. And if those are your cup of tea, you're just gonna find a ton to love about both of these. So buy them both, I guess.
Winner! Dynamite Cop. But play them both.
If there's one thing I've learned from this experience of playing through these games again, it's, well, I guess don't take fashion advice from terrorist pirates. But if there's two things I've learned, it's that any regular everyday object can become a deadly weapon in the right hands. Take, for instance, this garbage can. It's mesh, however, it can do a ton of damage. And, there's other things too, like this can of mixed nuts. I'm sure that could put an eye out. And, this Amigo plushie, probably not him. He can't really do much. But, and this toilet plunger, actual weapon in the game, by the way. This is a lot more dangerous than you may think. So next time you see me walking around with a toilet plunger and you're a pirate terrorist, you should be afraid. You should be very afraid. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Not even.
Ooh, can hear the ocean.